harmed were themselves, it was how spectacularly embarrassing, incompetent, and absurd the attempts were. Now, there's absolutely nothing funny about terrorism. Months ago, we found ourselves going down a strange internet rabbit hole: failed terrorist attacks. But what made many of them interesting was not just the fact that the only people that the terrorists harmed were themselves, it was how spectacularly embarrassing, incompetent, and absurd the attempts were. Now, there's absolutely nothing funny about terrorism, but I think that when you see these failed terrorist attacks for yourself, you'll agree that there is something cosmically comedic about each one of them that makes them kind of hilarious. But after writing the original script for this video, something happened that has never happened before in the history of our channel. During the visual production phase, we uncovered pivotal information that we were previously unaware of. Turns out, every single one of these failed terrorist attacks were, one way or another, all connected to one man whose name we had never heard before. This man has been described as many things, but US security experts keep coming back to the same words. Probably the most sophisticated terrorist bomb maker on the planet. Master bomb maker, evil genius. Now, let's be very clear about this. No terrorist is a genius. If they were, they wouldn't be attempting to dedicate their lives and deaths to the killing of innocent people. However, the US government officials' insistence on calling him a genius at all draws attention to something we should be talking about. And that is the strange, almost darkly comedic paradox that is this man and his legacy. This bomb maker was widely considered a brilliant mind by those in the counterterrorism world, a master of miniaturization who built bombs that successfully slipped past the most advanced security cordons on Earth. And admittedly, he certainly was very good at that part. But despite his brilliance at evasion, he was arguably the single worst terrorist in Al-Qaeda's history, for reasons you will repeatedly come to understand. And the story begins with the ridiculous terrorist plot that sparked his lifelong obsession. Let's get into it. On December 22, 2001, American Airlines Flight 63 was cruising at 35,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean en route from Paris to Miami. But on board, passengers were complaining about an unusual, highly concerning scent, the smell of something burning. Flight attendant Hermes Moutardier could smell it too. She walked the aisles of the plane over and over, looking for the source. Less than 4 months after 9/11, any kind of burning smell put everyone on edge, to say the least. Hermes quickly found the source. A massive man, 6 feet 4 inches tall, weighing 215 pounds, hunched over in seat 29J, a window seat. He was sitting alone, attempting to light a match. Hermes warned him that smoking was not allowed on board the aircraft. The man promised to stop and proceeded to begin picking his teeth with the used matchstick. But when she returned just a few minutes later, she found him leaning over his seat, hiding whatever he was doing. When she asked, the man grabbed at her. As he did, he unintentionally revealed what he was trying to hide. In Hermes' words, he's got his shoe off between his legs. All I see is wiring and the match. The match was lit. The man's name was Richard Reed, and he was trying to ignite approximately 283 grams of PETN explosives, enough to blow a hole in the fuselage and tear the aircraft apart, likely killing the 197 people on board. But Richard Reed didn't fit anybody's stereotypical idea of a terrorist. He was British, for one, born in London to a white English mother and a father of Jamaican descent. His father was a career criminal who spent much of Richard's childhood in prison. By his 20s, Richard had accumulated more than 10 convictions of his own for crimes against persons and property. In 1992, while serving a 3-year sentence for various street robberies, Reed converted to Islam. After his release, he joined the Brixton Mosque in South London, studying Arabic. At first, his newfound faith seemed to be a positive turning point. But by late 1997, Reed had fallen in with more radical crowds. He began attending the Finsbury Park Mosque in North London, notoriously headed by extremist preachers and recognized by authorities as a hotbed of radical ideology. By 1998, Reed had chosen jihad as his path. He began traveling extensively to Pakistan and Afghanistan, training at Al-Qaeda camps, learning bomb making, and receiving weapons training. The group's bomb makers had identified multiple vulnerabilities in airport security. Most notably at that time, everybody kept their shoes and coats on, with no effort being made to check them. Richard was subsequently recruited for a specific mission: to destroy a commercial airliner using explosives hidden in footwear. The bomb makers constructed a device using approximately 10 ounces of PETN, or pentaerythritol tetranitrate. It's a powerful, military-grade plastic explosive that looks like white powder. PETN is relatively stable, meaning it won't go off by accident, but only when detonated with something like a metallic blasting cap. The PETN was molded into the heels and soles of fashionable high-top basketball shoes, with TATP, a highly volatile compound that served as the detonator, concealed alongside the explosive and a fuse protruding slightly from it. But as with all al-Qaeda operatives, Reed wasn't working alone. British national Saeed Mohammed Badat had received an identical pair of shoe bombs and was expected to carry out a simultaneous attack on a different flight. In preparation, both men traveled to the British embassy in Brussels and falsely claimed to have lost their passports, applying for new ones. The fresh passports would have no suspicious stamps or travel history, allowing them to pass through customs unsuspected. But just days before the planned attack, Badat got cold feet, in the most ironic metaphorical sense possible, and withdrew from the plan entirely. Reed was on his own, but he was determined to see his part of the plan through. On December 21st, 2001, Reed arrived at Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris to board American Flight 63 to Miami. But something about him immediately raised suspicions. Multiple people throughout the airport, including policemen and American airline employees, were unsettled by his appearance and behavior. He looked disheveled, with long, unkempt hair and a bizarre, unpleasant demeanor. He had no checked luggage and paid for his round-trip ticket in cash. When questioned by a security official, Reed said that he had no baggage because he had clothes at his family's house in Antigua, but his behavior seemed evasive and he wasn't answering many of their questions. The security team decided to play it safe and call the police. Reed was subjected to additional searches and questioning that caused him to miss his original flight, but he never asked why he was being subjected to this inspection, as any ordinary person would. He didn't even appear anxious, which in itself was highly suspicious to the security professionals. Yet, the police specialists couldn't find his name on lists of people with criminal records or on a list of suspected terrorists. His passport was legitimate, and he was not a wanted suspect. According to all the standard police checks, this man did not pose a threat beyond being a little strange. Despite their concerns, the authorities decided he was, most likely, clean. But by the time Reed was cleared to fly, his plane had already left. After spending the night in a hotel room paid for by the airline, Reed set out to try again. But this delay would prove catastrophic for his plans in ways he could never have anticipated. On the morning of December 22, 2001, Reed was once again flagged as suspicious. Security personnel hand-checked his carry-on bag and used a wand to search for metal or weapons, but found nothing. Unfortunately, nobody thought to check his shoes. He was deemed clean, and this time he didn't miss his flight. But then, a short while into his flight, Reed was having an unusual amount of trouble trying to light the fuse of his shoe. Even worse for the would-be terrorist, the flight attendant, Hermes, now knew what he was doing. Hermes tried to grab Reed twice, but each time he just pushed her to the floor. She screamed for help, summoning flight attendants and others. But Reed fought them all off, determined to complete his mission and light that fuse. That was until Kwame James, a 24-year-old, 6'8", 250-pound professional basketball player from Canada, rushed to help after being woken by the chaos. Along with 6 other male passengers, James helped to physically overpower Reed. 2 French doctors on board injected Reed with sedatives from the aircraft's medical kit, buying them time for the passengers and crew to restrain him with seatbelt extensions, belts, headphone cords, and anything else they could find. Captain Hans Mantel asked the basketball player Kwame James to spend the next 3.5 hours until landing watching over the terrorist. At one point, James asked Reed directly, "Were you really gonna blow up this plane?" Reed simply replied, "You'll see. You'll all see." The captain diverted the flight to Boston's Logan International Airport, requesting Air Force fighter jets to escort them. For the remaining 3 hours of the flight, the crew adhered strictly to security protocols. No passenger could stand up without permission. Those needing to use the bathroom were searched with their pockets emptied. Within minutes of landing safely, Massachusetts state police officers boarded the aircraft and took Reed into police custody. So why didn't the bomb detonate? The answer is hilariously simple. His feet were sweaty. After he missed that first flight on December 21st, Reed had to wear his explosive-filled shoes for an extra day in Paris. That, in addition to the extra perspiration from his feet during the tense hours before and during the flight, meant his shoes were soaked through by the time he attempted to light the fuse. The moisture had rendered the detonator totally useless, and the PETN, stable as it is, sat there doing nothing. But make no mistake, it was a very close call. FBI explosive experts examined Reed's shoes and confirmed that the devices were functional. Had the moisture not disrupted the plan, it likely would have caused a catastrophic crash, killing everyone on board. On January 16, 2002, a federal grand jury in Boston returned a 9-count indictment against Reed. The charges included attempted use of a weapon of mass destruction, attempted homicide of U.S. nationals overseas, placing an explosive device on an aircraft, attempted murder of passengers on an aircraft, 2 counts of interfering with a flight crew, willfully attempting to set fire to and destroy an aircraft, using a destructive device during a crime of violence, and attempted wrecking of a mass transportation vehicle. Reed initially pleaded not guilty to 8 of the charges, but 9 months later, he changed his mind. On October 4th, 2002, Reed pleaded guilty on all of them, acknowledging his membership in al-Qaeda and his loyalty to Osama bin Laden, and confidently told U.S. District Judge William G. Young, "I am a member of al-Qaeda and I pledge to Osama bin Laden. I am an enemy of your country." On January 30th, 2003, Reed was handed a sentence of 3 life terms plus 110 years in prison without the possibility of parole, along with a $2 million fine. Reed was transferred to ADX Florence, a super maximum security prison in Colorado, nicknamed the Alcatraz of the Rockies, the most secure federal prison in the United States. Reed now spends 23 hours a day in solitary confinement in a 7 by 12-foot cell. The cells contain only a concrete bunk, desk, stool, shelf, and a steel sink and toilet. When removed from his cell, Reed must be accompanied by guards at all times. While his attack thankfully failed, the shoe bomber did have one significant impact on the world. His failed attack led to the now ubiquitous requirement that passengers remove their shoes at airport security checkpoints around the world. For over 2 decades, billions of travelers have walked through security in their socks because Richard Reed's feet were too sweaty to light a fuse. But Richard Reed had a bigger and more troubling impact on the world. It seems that a certain aspiring bomb maker was inspired by this shoe bomb. The materials used and the philosophy behind them are identical to what was to come. This was a prototype. He saw the shoe bomb not as a failure of physics, but as a proof of concept, and he would spend the rest of his life trying to perfect it, no matter the cost. Prince Mohammed bin Nayef was one of the most powerful men in Saudi Arabia. He was the architect of the kingdom's counterterrorism program, publicly advocating for harsh security measures and even harsher punishments for terrorists. His cooperation with Western intelligence agencies and his brutal effectiveness at dismantling al-Qaeda cells in Saudi Arabia made him very unpopular among jihadists and a priority target for assassinations. By 2009, he had already survived 2 assassination attempts, but he was about to face the most unusual one yet, and perhaps even the most unusual one in the history of assassinations. Ibrahim Hassan Tali al-Asiri was born into a highly religious military family in the Saudi capital, Riyadh, as the son of a retired soldier. Ibrahim had studied chemistry at King Saud University and showed great promise, though he never actually completed his degree. At some point in his 20s, Ibrahim had attempted to cross into Iraq to join Islamist insurgents fighting the American occupation, but he was caught and imprisoned by Saudi authorities. Later, in a statement published in an al-Qaeda-produced magazine, he described the experience. They put me in prison, and I began to see the depths of servitude to the Crusaders and their hatred for the true worshippers of God from the way they interrogated me. After his release, he was more radicalized than ever. In 2007, Ibrahim and his family were living together in the holy city of Mecca. But one day, Ibrahim and his younger brother, Abdullah, went missing without a trace. Their father later told the Saudi Gazette, Abdullah later contacted us to say he was out of the country, but did not say where. From that day on, we had no more news of him until we saw his and his brother's pictures in the media on the list of wanted people. On February 3, 2009, both sons were named on Saudi Arabia's list of 85 most wanted terrorist suspects. Ibrahim was number 1. Abdullah was number 40. The brothers had slipped across the border into Yemen and joined Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. But Ibrahim had a specific role in mind for his younger brother. Abdullah was expendable in a way Ibrahim wasn't, and more importantly, Abdullah was willing to die for the cause. So, in August, Abdullah contacted Prince Mohammed bin Nayef and expressed a desire to surrender. He claimed he wanted to enroll in Saudi Arabia's terrorist rehabilitation program, an initiative that bin Nayef personally oversaw. The program aimed to de-radicalize terrorists and reintegrate them into society, offering former terrorists significant benefits, including better housing, medical care, and educational opportunities for their families. Abdullah claimed that he wanted to change his life for the better. Prince bin Nayef agreed to meet with him. It was a gesture of good faith and a potential propaganda victory. The prince even arranged for a private jet to fly Abdullah from Yemen to Jeddah for the meeting. But, of course, it was a trap. The meeting was scheduled for August 27, 2009, during Ramadan, when tradition holds that well-wishers can queue up at royal palaces to greet members of the royal family face-to-face. To ensure the prince's safety, bin Nayef's bodyguards put Abdullah through rigorous security screening, including metal detectors and full-body searches. They held him in secure custody for over 24 hours before granting him an audience. They determined he posed no threat. He had no gun, no knife, and no bomb vest. Instead, Ibrahim had developed a way to hide explosives on his brother with what security experts would later describe as a novel technique. Well, actually, he didn't hide them on him, but rather, inside him. There's no other way to say this. Abdullah Hassan al-Asiri had approximately 1 pound of PETN plastic explosives hidden inside his rectum and anal canal. The bomb had likely been carefully inserted into Abdullah's body cavity with the, uncomfortable assistance from his brother Ibrahim. The explosive was specifically shaped to fit, and a detonation device, a mobile phone, or a specific phrase spoken aloud was integrated with it. PETN, as you know from the shoe bomb case, is extremely stable. It won't go off by accident, but it requires a metallic blasting cap to detonate, a sharp shockwave that initiates the chemical chain reaction. However, Ibrahim was determined to avoid that entirely. He had designed an innovative, completely non-metallic trigger system using a chemical fuse that would bypass metal detectors. So, on the evening of August 27th, when Abdullah was brought to Prince bin Nayef's palace in Jeddah with his buttload of explosives, no one was any the wiser. He joined a line of well-wishers, all of whom were there to pay their respects during Ramadan. When his turn came, Abdullah was led to a room where Prince Mohammed bin Nayef stood waiting. Years of planning, months of preparation, and 24 hours of detention had led to this moment. Everyone truly believed he was there to change his life. All he had to do was blow up his own rectum from the inside. According to one account, Abdullah told the prince, "Oh, you also need to speak to my friends, because they also want to give themselves up. And if they hear from you, they'll certainly come." This was part of the plan. Abdullah had to get the prince talking on a cell phone, which would then be used to send the detonation signal. A recording of the phone call, later released by Al-Qaeda, captured a beep, likely a text message, followed seconds later by the sound of the explosion. Abdullah Hassan al-Asiri's body exploded while Prince Mohammed bin Nayef was standing feet away from him. The blast was immediate and devastating. For Abdullah, Prince Mohammed bin Nayef survived with only minor injuries, slight wounds, and bruising at most. Abdullah's own body absorbed most of the blast. The force went downwards into the concrete floor, blowing a crater in the ground and tearing Abdullah in half. But the human body, it turns out, makes an excellent blast shield when the explosion originates from inside it. When asked after the incident, Prince bin Nayef said, "I did not want him to be searched, but he surprised me by blowing himself up." The August 27, 2009 incident remains the only publicly documented case of an actual body cavity bomb attack in history. After the assassination attempt, the brother's father went on record expressing his shock and disapproval. He complained that Abdullah had been snatched from his family by extremists. Of course, that extremist was Ibrahim himself, who had personally recruited his younger brother for the mission. Ibrahim al-Asiri's ingenious butt bomb was a spectacular failure that did nothing but kill his own brother. But he was just getting started. Just 4 months after his brother's botched assassination attempt, Ibrahim al-Asiri set his sights on a much larger target, an American passenger jet. Umar Farouk Abdulmutallab, a 23-year-old Nigerian man, was the youngest of 16 children born to one of the wealthiest men in Africa. Umar had studied mechanical engineering at University College London. He was, by all accounts, a gifted student, but during his time in London, he became increasingly devout in his faith, eventually detaching himself from his peers and condemning his father's banking profession for the unforgivable sin of charging interest. In 2008, Umar traveled to Yemen, seemingly to study Arabic, but he was soon drawn into the orbit of Anwar al-Awlaki, the American-born radical cleric who served as al-Qaeda's chief recruiter and propagandist. Anwar is believed to have introduced Umar to their most genius bomb maker, Ibrahim al-Asiri. Umar's father had grown alarmed by what was happening with his son. In November 2009, just weeks before the attack, he walked into the U.S. Embassy in Abuja, Nigeria, and warned officials that his son had been radicalized and might be planning something dangerous. Umar's name was subsequently added to a database of over 550,000 people with potential terrorist connections. But, critically, he was not placed on the no-fly list. On December 25th, Christmas Day 2009, Umar traveled from Ghana to Amsterdam, where he boarded Flight 253 to Detroit. He carried a Nigerian passport and a valid U.S. tourist visa. He had purchased his ticket with cash in Ghana on December 16th. He had no checked luggage, but what he did have was a custom-made pair of underwear, believed to be designed by the wannabe evil mastermind Ibrahim al-Asiri. Sewn into the crotch was a packet containing approximately 80 grams of PETN. To avoid metal detectors, al-Asiri had designed a chemical detonator housed in a plastic syringe. The idea was that Umar would inject a liquid acid into the PETN, creating a chemical reaction that would generate enough heat and shock to detonate the main charge without the need for any material. 80 grams of PETN, properly detonated, is enough to blow a massive hole in the fuselage of an aircraft. At cruising altitude, the explosive decompression would tear the airplane apart, killing all 289 people on board. In theory, al-Asiri's plan was worryingly solid. The device worked perfectly at evading security. Umar passed through screening in both Ghana and Amsterdam without raising any alarms. The non-metallic syringe didn't trigger metal detectors, and the PETN powder was totally invisible to X-ray machines. As Flight 253 began its descent into Detroit, Umar went to the restroom for about 20 minutes. When he returned to his seat, witnesses say he complained of an upset stomach and pulled a blanket over his lap. Underneath that blanket, he prepared to trigger the device. Passengers suddenly heard a series of popping noises like firecrackers. A foul odor filled the cabin. Then they saw flames shooting up the wall of the plane and from Umar's trouser leg. Jasper Scheringa, a Dutch filmmaker sitting nearby, dove over the seats, tackled Umar, and held him down while flight attendants rushed over with fire extinguishers and doused the flames. Umar was dragged to the front of the plane and restrained. He had suffered severe first and second-degree burns to his hands, inner thigh, and genitalia. When the plane landed safely at Detroit Metropolitan Airport, Umar was arrested by U.S. Customs and Border Protection officers. He told authorities immediately that he had been directed by al-Qaeda and had obtained the device in Yemen. Al-Qaeda claimed responsibility for the failed attack, describing it as revenge for the United States' role in a Yemeni military offensive against al-Qaeda. So why did the bomb fail? Again, the fundamental problem was physics. Al-Asiri's non-metallic chemical syringe was a clever workaround for evading security, but it was scientifically weak. The chemical detonator simply could not generate enough force to initiate a proper detonation of the PETN. And, just as a secondary failure, the bomb had been worn against Umar's body for hours. The moisture from his sweat and the ambient body heat likely degraded the chemical detonator and dampened the explosive powder. His body had effectively neutralized the trigger, just like Richard Reed had experienced with his sweaty shoes. Instead of a high-order detonation, the PETN just caught fire. Dramatic, painful, and terrifying for those on board, but not catastrophic for anyone except Umar's reproductive organs. Once again, al-Asiri's talent for evasion had been undone by his incompetence at basic physics, but the intelligence community wasn't laughing. This was the closest al-Asiri had come to successfully bringing down a plane. Fortunately, in May 2011, the FBI announced something big. They had pulled a fingerprint off the remnants of the underwear bomb, and it belonged to Ibrahim al-Asiri. They now had forensic proof linking the so-called master bomb maker in Yemen directly to the device. Counterterrorism officials also confirmed that Ibrahim was implicated in the rectal bomb that killed Abdullah. They finally knew, without a doubt, that this one man was behind both attacks. The hunt for Ibrahim al-Asiri was now a top priority of the United States government. On February 16, 2012, Umar Abdulmuttalib was sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms, plus 50 years without the possibility of parole. He was transferred to ADX Florence, the same supermax prison housing Richard Reed. Like the shoe bomb, the Christmas underwear attack changed airports forever. It led to the widespread deployment of full body scanners at airports worldwide. But al-Asiri was already thinking up his next workaround.
You know who doesn't just settle for failures and workarounds?
But you know who hey, that's my line. Ugh, not again. Bro!
Yes?
No, not you, Deja Bruise. I meant the original. Never mind. Just don't take my lines, alright? It's not cool.
You know what's also not cool? Receiving a workplace injury due to negligence of another party.
Stop turning what I say into segues. Listen, Brew, I know you're new here, but there's a reason why I do the sponsor segments, okay? It's because—
Just like there's a reason why Morgan & Morgan, this video's sponsor, is America's largest injury law firm.
They have 1,000+ attorneys and more than 100 offices nationwide.
They've recovered $30 billion for their clients. And
they've been fighting for people for over 35 years like an army of lawyers ready to battle it out.
They're for the people, protecting those defenseless against powerful interests. So if you get injured because of someone else's negligence, you deserve to be paid. And guess what?
The fee is free unless they win, and that's what makes them so great.
For more information, you can go to forthepeople.com/brew.
And now, back to our regularly scheduled programming. Can't wait to see what dumb plan that so-called evil genius is gonna think of next. And as for you, new guy, let's go get you some coffee, okay?
Having failed with body cavities and undergarments, al-Asiri turned his attention to the global supply chain. If he couldn't get a competent person to successfully detonate a bomb on a plane, he would just skip the middleman and mail the bombs instead. In late October 2010, 2 packages were dropped off at FedEx and UPS offices in Sana'a, Yemen. They were addressed to the former locations of 2 synagogues in Chicago, addresses that the terrorists had likely found through a quick internet search. The packages were addressed to specific people, Diego Deza and Renald Krak. But Deza and Krak were not Chicago citizens. They weren't the targets or even vaguely related to the synagogues at all. It turns out that Diego Deza was a Grand Inquisitor during the Spanish Inquisition known for his cruelty, and Renald Krak was a French crusader known for murdering Muslims and later beheaded by Sultan Saladin in the 12th century. It was an inside joke for the jihadists, who are so famous for their sense of humor. The packages contained computer printers, but inside the toner cartridges, al-Asiri had constructed his most advanced devices yet. Each cartridge was packed with 300 to 400 grams of highly concentrated PETN, significantly more than the underwear bomb. The detonation mechanism was more carefully constructed this time. A cell phone alarm clock would activate a battery, sending power through a thin wire filament inside a syringe containing lead azide, a powerful chemical initiator that would ignite the PETN. Al-Asiri was meticulous now. He had removed the displays from the cell phones to extend battery life, and wired the devices so that, if X-rayed, they blended seamlessly with the printer's own electronics. The dense PETN powder looked exactly like printer toner, and Al-Qaeda later bragged that the entire operation cost less than $4,200. The bombs were designed to detonate mid-flight, bringing down the cargo planes over the eastern United States. The packages began their journey, flying on both passenger and cargo planes. One flew on a UPS cargo plane through Cologne, Germany, to East Midlands Airport in the UK. The other made its way through Qatar Airways passenger flights, first from Sana'a to Doha, then from Doha to Dubai, before being transferred to a FedEx cargo plane. I'll just repeat that for a second. al-Asiri's bombs had successfully traveled on passenger aircraft, surrounded by hundreds of innocent people, and nobody had any idea. And they would have exploded had it not been for a last-minute tip. Saudi Arabia's security chief, Prince Mohammed bin Nayef, the very same prince who had survived al-Asiri's butt bomb, called John Brennan the director of the CIA. A former Guantanamo Bay inmate and al-Qaeda defector acting as a double agent had provided intelligence communities with tracking numbers and told them to look for toner cartridges. Authorities scrambled. In the UK, British military and police explosive experts boarded the UPS plane at East Midlands Airport and searched the cargo. They pulled out the suspect printer, ran it through explosives detection equipment, X-rayed it, collected chemical swabs, and brought in sniffer dogs. They found nothing. The authorities were so convinced the printer was harmless that they gave the all-clear, allowed the plane to continue its journey to Philadelphia, and removed all safety cordons from the airport. But here's the really remarkable, scary part. During their examination, Scotland Yard officers had actually removed the printer cartridge to inspect it more closely. They had no idea that they were literally handling a bomb. They also didn't realize that by removing the cartridge, they had unknowingly disconnected the detonation circuit. They had disarmed the device just 3 hours before the cell phone alarm was set to trigger it, purely by luck. Dubai authorities later found a similar bomb in the second package. US and Saudi officials insisted that the British take another look. Scotland Yard flew their printer to a military laboratory. There, forensic experts finally discovered the hidden PETN. But now, the situation was more serious than ever. Al-Asiri's printer bombs had completely defeated X-ray machines, sniffer dogs, chemical swabs, and trained explosive experts. They were, by any measure, a sign that the man behind them actually posed a genuine threat. And for governments around the world, there was no doubt that this was the work of Ibrahim Al-Asiri. John Brennan, the Deputy National Security Advisor for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism, told the press, "I think the indications are, right now, based on the forensics analysis, that it's an individual who has been responsible for putting these devices together. He's a very dangerous individual, clearly someone who has a fair amount of training and experience. We need to find him and bring him to justice as soon as we can." Countries worldwide suspended freight shipments from Yemen. Airlines halted cargo flights from Yemen and Somalia. The global air cargo industry had to completely overhaul its screening procedures with new protocols, new technologies, and new restrictions that persist to this day. Al-Asiri had changed the airline security process again, but he still hadn't achieved his goal. Not a single plane had been brought down. In March 2011, U.S. intelligence officially designated Ibrahim Al-Asiri a wanted terrorist. American drones prowled the skies of Yemen constantly, searching for him. In September of that year, U.S. officials briefly believed he had been killed in the same drone strike that took out notorious radical cleric Anwar al-Awlaki. But it soon became apparent that Al-Asiri was still alive and still working. In May 2012, U.S. intelligence officials announced they had thwarted yet another plot by al-Qaeda to bring down a U.S.-bound airliner. The details were extraordinary. Al-Asiri, for the first time, wasn't trying to outsmart them with something new. He had gone back to the classics. Ibrahim built an upgraded version of the underwear bomb. This one was even more advanced than the device that failed over Detroit. It, again, contained no metal parts whatsoever, ensuring it would pass through the new magnetometers installed after the 2009 attack. It used a high-grade military explosive that TSA had never seen before, and crucially, it featured a dual detonation system, 2 separate triggers. Al-Asiri had learned from Umar Abdulmuttalib's failure. If one trigger didn't work, the second one would. He handed his underwear bomb over to a man who was tasked with buying a ticket and bringing down a plane. Any plane. However, Al-Asiri had, yet again, made a fatal miscalculation. The man he entrusted with his masterpiece wasn't a radicalized jihadist. He was a double agent working for Saudi intelligence, and by extension, the CIA and British intelligence, all of whom wanted to take down Al-Asiri once and for all. Instead of boarding a plane, the agent took the bomb and handed it straight to his Saudi handlers. The CIA now had an intact, fully functional Al-Asiri device to study. It was an intelligence goldmine. They could analyze his exact methods, the chemical composition of his explosives, and the evolution of his trigger mechanisms. They could reverse engineer his thinking and develop countermeasures. The so-called master bomb maker had essentially gift-wrapped his best work and handed it to the CIA. The intelligence gathered from the 2012 device, combined with years of relentless tracking, started to close the net around Ibrahim Al-Asiri. He was forced into hiding in the mountains of Yemen, constantly on the move, knowing the sky was watching him. He trained apprentices, hoping to pass on his deadly knowledge, but the CIA had already seen his best work from the inside out. And then one day in 2016, Ibrahim Al-Asiri watched as someone very almost achieved the one thing he never could. Abdullahi Abdusalam Borle was, by most accounts, an ordinary man, a teacher from the Somaliland region who worked at an Islamic school and suffered from a leg problem that required him to sometimes walk with a cane. In January 2016, Borle told his local imam that he was traveling abroad for medical treatment, specifically to Turkey and India to strengthen his leg. He had traveled to Mogadishu to obtain a passport just to make this trip. On the morning of February 2nd, he arrived at Mogadishu airport for his flight, but his timing could not have been worse. That morning, something unusual had happened at the airport. Turkish Airlines had canceled its inbound flight from Djibouti. The official reason cited operational reasons and strong winds. 70 passengers who had checked in for Borle's Turkish Airlines flight were now stranded. After a long period of uncertainty, Daallo Airlines agreed to transport them on Flight 159. Across the other side of Mogadishu Airport, 2 employees arrived for their shift. They placed a laptop onto the X-ray screening machine and waited patiently for it to go through. The laptop passed without any problems. Nobody even noticed that the computer contained a sophisticated explosive device constructed using military-grade TNT. The bomb had been integrated into the computer in such a way that their colleagues operating the X-ray machine, either through negligence or complicity, failed to detect it. 2 men, dressed in airport staff uniforms, strolled through the departure lounge, carrying the laptop. One wore an orange high-visibility vest, the other wore a blue shirt. They approached a man in a wheelchair, waiting for his flight, and handed him the laptop before walking away. It was Borle. He wasn't actually a teacher seeking medical care. Borle had been recruited by Al-Shabaab, the Al-Qaeda-linked terrorist group, fighting to overthrow Somalia's government. He was there to blow up a plane. When Daallo Airlines Flight 159 began boarding, Borle was assisted onto the plane with a wheelchair. He had initially been assigned an aisle seat, but asked to trade for a window seat, specifically seat 16F. This seat placement was positioned beside the forward wing root, directly next to the aircraft's fuel tanks. A bomb detonation here at cruising altitude would trigger a secondary blast in the fuel tank, potentially destroying the entire aircraft and killing as many people as possible. At 11 a.m. local time, Flight 159 departed Mogadishu, heading for Djibouti City. In the cockpit, Captain Vladimir Vodopevic monitored instruments while his first officer, Ricardo Benaldi, flew the aircraft. 20 minutes after takeoff, at an altitude of 10,000 feet, a hole was suddenly ripped in the fuselage. The captain and first officer had no idea what had happened. All they knew was that the Airbus A321 had a gaping wound in its side. The oxygen masks were deployed, and cold air was screaming through the cabin. First Officer Benaldi sat frozen, not knowing what to do. The autopilot had disconnected. Autothrust was gone. They were now manually flying a wounded aircraft over Somalia, one of the most dangerous countries on Earth, with 74 passengers and 7 crew members aboard. Behind them, in the cabin, flight attendants were moving passengers away from the meter-wide hole in the fuselage. But, remarkably, most passengers were calm, some even recording the incident on their phones, the hole visible behind them. But one passenger was missing. He had been sitting in seat 16F, a window seat positioned directly next to the aircraft's fuel tanks, which had mysteriously not ignited. Abdullahi Abdusalam Borle had been sucked out through the very hole his bomb had created. His body plummeted thousands of feet, eventually landing in a field near the town of Balad, Somalia, approximately 18 to 30 kilometers north of Mogadishu. Local residents reported seeing something fall from the sky. They soon found his burned remains. Captain Vodopevic declared an emergency and brought the aircraft back to Mogadishu. At around 8:53 a.m., just 19 minutes after the explosion, the aircraft landed safely. Out of 81 people aboard, there was only one fatality, the bomber himself. Borle's bomb exploded around 10,400 feet, far below the aircraft's planned cruising altitude of 30,000 feet. At that lower altitude, the cabin wasn't fully pressurized. The difference in pressure between inside and outside the aircraft was much smaller than it would have been at cruising altitude. A relatively small explosion at high altitude can have catastrophic secondary effects. At 30,000 feet, with full cabin pressurization, even a small hole becomes a massive problem. The pressure differential sucks out the plane's contents, rapidly enlarging the hole and potentially causing the aircraft to break apart mid-air. It would be almost impossible to survive. However, at lower altitudes, with a smaller pressure difference, the hole remained roughly the same size as that created by the explosion. The plane had departed an hour later than scheduled. That flight delay meant Borle likely either grew impatient or had a timer set for a specific interval after takeoff. Had the flight departed on time, perhaps the aircraft would have reached cruising altitude before detonation. If this is the case, then 1 hour was the difference between saving 80 lives and losing them all. And, once again, the bomber's own body had absorbed much of the blast, shielding the other passengers. He became a shield for the very people he wanted to kill. Somali authorities immediately launched an investigation, reviewing surveillance footage from 92 closed-circuit cameras at the airport. Within days, they had arrested 20 people, including several airport employees. By the end of the investigation, over 45 people had been arrested in connection with the plot. Now, this attack was carried out by Al-Shabaab, not Al-Qaeda. We can't say that al-Asiri was involved with this attempt, but intelligence agencies recognized the technique immediately. The concept of hiding explosives inside functional electronics was a hallmark of Al-Asiri's philosophy. U.S. intelligence officials had long suspected that Al-Asiri was sharing his techniques and training others to develop laptop and mobile device bombs. This recent attempt suggested that the suspicion may have been accurate. In 2017, partially in response to this incident and intelligence about Al-Asiri's ongoing work, the United States and the United Kingdom implemented temporary bans on large electronic devices and carry-on luggage from certain countries, requiring laptops to be checked in the cargo hold instead. Just as the shoe bomb changed how we handle footwear at airports, and the underwear bomb led to full body scanners, and the printer cartridge bombs revolutionized cargo screening, the laptop bomb concept changed how we handle electronics. Ultimately, all roads led back to Ibrahim Al-Asiri. In 2017, a U.S. drone strike found Ibrahim Al-Asiri. His death was kept quiet for over 2 years, until the Trump administration officially confirmed it in October 2019. This will confirm for the first time that Ibrahim Al-Asiri, a senior al-Qaeda bomb maker and terrorist coordinator, was killed 2 years ago in a United States counterterrorism operation in Yemen. Ibrahim Al-Asiri's legacy is now written into the rules of every airport on Earth. When you take off your shoes, when your laptop is swabbed, when you walk through a millimeter wave scanner with your hands raised, you are participating in a global security protocol that was designed entirely to stop one man. Even U.S. intelligence admitted that Al-Asiri was terrifyingly good when it came to evasion. He understood security technology's blind spots better than almost anyone. His bombs passed through X-ray machines, fooled sniffer dogs, and defeated even the greatest security experts. He was, as the CIA said, incredibly creative and incredibly innovative. That we reluctantly have to admit. But for all that experts can say about his terrifying brilliance, his record speaks for itself. The butt bomb blew up on his own brother and barely scratched the target. The underwear bomb gave a man severe crotch burns and a life sentence. The printer bombs were intercepted by a last-minute tip. The second underwear bomb was handed directly to the CIA. Al-Asiri was smart enough to remove metal from the equation. His chemical detonators, plastic syringes, and non-metallic fuses were invisible to security, but they were also, thankfully, useless. However, he does have a legacy. The so-called most dangerous bomb maker in the world changed the way we travel forever. He was hunted by the CIA and outmaneuvered them for nearly a decade, but he never brought a single plane down. In fact, in a true display of that darkly comedic paradox that we mentioned in the beginning, his failed attempts to harm innocent people only strengthened airport security and potentially saved thousands of lives. We made this video for the same reason we choose all our topics, because we believed it was a story worth sharing. The only problem with choosing topics based on importance rather than trendiness is that sometimes the YouTube algorithm doesn't agree with your choice. That's why, as a small group of people who refuse to be bought out by private equity, we depend on viewers like you to keep our channel independent and free to watch. The first thing you can do is hit the like button. If you're not already, subscribe to the channel. This helps tell the algorithm that this video is, in fact, worth recommending to people. To support us directly, you can go to brewsolves.com where you can click this button to get some merch. We recently released a design inspired by our frustration that the wealthy elite who control our governments and the corporations that bribe them are often not properly investigated or held accountable for the crimes they commit, no matter how vile. Also at brewsolves.com, you can click this button to become a member. At $5 a month, you'll get access to ad-free versions of our YouTube videos, bonus content, and a 15% discount on merch. At higher tiers, you'll become an honorary Brew Crew member and get
Spy Kids, Agent Cody Banks, Totally Spies, Kim Possible. There are plenty of depictions of teenage secret agents in movies and television, but they're all just children's fantasy, right? Well, what if I told you that teen spies do actually exist? Except they aren't specially gifted North American kids tasked with saving the world. They're North Koreans stolen from their families at a young age and trained to kill innocent people for the glory of the supreme leader. Admittedly, no one outside of the hermit state knows much about North Korea's spy system, which is a big part of why we wanted to make this video. It's hard not to be intrigued by the mystery of it all. So when we went on a deep dive into what is known about North Korean espionage, reading through human rights records, memoirs, books, and interviews, we found a case that gives a shocking look behind the curtain, one that, surprisingly, few people talk about. The story of Kim Hyun-hee, an ordinary schoolgirl transformed into an undercover mass murderer, along with countless teenagers just like her. Let's get into it. Pyongyang, 1980. Kim Hyun-hee was 18 years old when her life changed forever. She was studying Japanese at Pyongyang Foreign Language College when she was summoned into the dean's office. Inside was a man with a flag-shaped badge, the mark of North Korea's Central Party, the country's ruling and only political party. After brief greetings, the man asked her to recite one of the many virtues of the nation's leader, Kim Jong-il. These virtues were propaganda stories every North Korean was raised on. Tales of Kim Jong-il's supposed brilliance and heroism. She knew he was testing her loyalty to her country. Hyun-hee ran through all of the stories she was told as a child. After a moment of hesitation, she recalled one of Jong-il's visits to a battlefield, highlighting how dedicated he was to his country and kind to those who fought for it. The man then asked where her father worked, what his rank was, and whether she was doing well in school, before sending her back to class without explanation. A week later, Hyun-hee and her female classmates were ordered to line up in the school gym. Visiting men in Central Party uniforms looked them over, took notes. If the men liked what they saw, they would ask the girls their names. Hyun-hee was one of the few asked to return for a private meeting with a group of officers. They, too, asked about her studies, her plans, her ability to recite from memory key pieces of propaganda. But then, the men went silent. After a moment, one of them finally spoke up, asking her, "Kim Hyun-hee, would you be willing to die for the party?" Hyun-hee didn't expect the question, but her answer came out effortlessly. "Of course, I will do everything the party asks me to, even if it means giving my life." Hyun-hee was given the good news. She had been chosen. For what? She didn't know yet, but the man informed her that she would have just one more night with her family before she would be taken away. Since she was a young child, Hyun-hee had been taught to think of North Korean leader Kim Il-sung as a kind of god, someone that she should put before even her own parents. She prayed to him every night, thanked him for everything. She wholeheartedly loved her country and believed in its mission. And now, she was being asked to serve it. Hyun-hee's siblings were thrilled that the regime had chosen their sister, but her parents were more conflicted. Her mother was upset, bordering on grief. Her father seemed totally unfazed by the news. It wasn't the glorious response she had expected. The next day, Hyun-hee got into a car and left her home, waving off her family. She told herself that every child has to leave home at some point. I could hardly ask for anything better, despite not yet knowing what honor she was about to receive. The car took her far out of civilization, miles away from any city or town, deep into a remote valley at the foot of Mount Itbul. Hyun-hee had arrived at Kyumsung Military College, North Korea's elite espionage school. That was the moment she realized what the regime wanted for her. They wanted a spy. Kim Hyun-hee was given a new name, Kim Ok-hwa. Her real identity was to be forgotten, never spoken of. Now, at 19, she began training what would consume the next 8 years of her life. The schedule was brutal. From 6 a.m. to 11 p.m., she and hundreds of other female students were worked to the bone. Their every movement was monitored and carefully controlled. Physical training pushed her body to its limits. She learned to master pistols, rifles, and grenades. She trained in Taekwondo, Tong Soo-do, and Hapkido, drilling the movements thousands of times until they were instinctive. She sparred with men twice her size until she could overpower 3 of them at once. Experts taught her how to hit the fatal points on the human body, how to kill with their bare hands. But the regime made it clear that physical training was only one piece of the puzzle. The real transformation into a great spy was psychological. The trainees were taught that the outside world was evil, that America was a beast, that the West was decadent and corrupt, and that South Korea was an impoverished, oppressed nation whose authorities were the most evil of them all. A barbaric group known to gouge eyes and rip out fingernails and teeth. All they needed to know about the world was that North Korea was the only place they would ever be safe, and her sacred duty was to aid the regime's mission to keep it that way. They also had to be isolated. Every North Korean recruit was totally cut off from their families, their past lives, and anything that could potentially make them question their mission. Kim Hyun-hee's 18-year-old roommate, Suk-hee, became like a sister to her during those years, because she was all Hyun-hee had. Hyun-hee and Suk-hee trained side by side from dawn to midnight for the next 8 years. They shared everything, their exhaustion, their fears, their small victories. If one struggled, the other would push her forward. They were told repeatedly that they were serving their nation together, and that this was the most notable, honorable sacrifice they could ever make. Eventually, Hyun-hee was occasionally allowed to see her family, but it was obvious that things had changed. She couldn't help but notice that her parents were visibly upset about the government taking her from them. Yet every time she left, she felt ashamed of how attached they were to her, as if it was an attack on her honor and purpose. At the training facility, Kim Hyun-hee was surrounded by women with stories very similar to her own. They have been selected by the regime because of their exemplary performance at their schools and colleges. In fact, that is a key element of how this system operates. From the moment children enter school in North Korea, they're evaluated not only on their grades, but on their potential. Teachers are expected to report on their intelligence, their physical abilities, their ideological commitment, essentially their devotion to the Kim family. But according to documented human rights reports we have from multiple defectors and survivors, the state looks for one other thing: the right family background. Your family's class rank in North Korean society determines almost everything about your life, especially the opportunities you will get. Kim Hyun-hee came from a privileged background. Her father was a diplomat who frequently traveled the world for work. She had lived in Cuba for a time as a child, attended good schools, and displayed an impressive aptitude for languages. She was an ideal candidate. Hyun-hee was assigned a teacher, a Japanese woman who would live with her at the training facility. Her name was Yaiko Taguchi, but the North Koreans renamed her Hyun-hee. Unlike the North Koreans, Yaiko didn't join voluntarily. She had been abducted from Tokyo in June 1978, snatched off the street, and smuggled to North Korea, leaving behind two very young children that she would never see again. Her purpose wasn't to become a spy. It was to help create them. For 3 years, Yaiko lived with Hyun-hee in a cramped room, teaching her to speak Japanese fluently, to adopt Japanese mannerisms, to think like a Japanese woman. Day after day, they studied together, while Yaiko's family desperately sought answers an ocean away. And Yaiko's story is not a one-off occurrence. Defectors have confirmed that, at least throughout the 1980s and 90s, North Korea regularly kidnapped foreigners to train their spies, using real people as human templates for their operatives to learn from and copy. While adults like Yaiko were taken for their language skills and native cultural knowledge, the regime, more often than not, prefers children or teenagers. Japanese citizens, some as young as 13, were regularly abducted from beaches and city streets. South Koreans were taken from boats in coastal towns. Hundreds, perhaps even thousands of people simply vanished, presumably forced to serve as unwilling cogs in North Korea's intelligence machine. Like Megumi Yokota, who was just 13 years old when she was kidnapped from Japan in 1977. She had been walking home from badminton practice when North Korean agents grabbed her. According to a South Korean source, she was sent to a spy training facility in Pyongyang soon after her abduction. The regime had told her that if she studied hard and learned Korean well, she would be sent back to Japan and reunited with her family. For 5 years, Megumi studied hard, becoming fluent in Korean, but the North Koreans kept her away anyway. Megumi's fate varies depending on the source. Some claim she died, others say she was institutionalized in a psychiatric hospital. The regime's official story is that she died in 1993, but defectors claim to have seen her alive in 1994. The truth, as with everything in North Korea,